Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta, Georgia, January 15, 1929. He was the son of the late Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. and Alberta Williams King. King had a promising life, and it started at a young age. He finished high school when he was only 15 and went on to Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. While still at Morehouse, King joined his father in the ministry, becoming a Baptist minister in 1948, and graduated from Morehouse the same year, all at the age of 19. He would study under his father at Ebenezer Baptist. There he honed his craft and his delivery that would later become the voice of a movement and the call of the disenfranchised and unjustly treated in America and around the world. On June 18, 1953, he married Coretta Scott. She would become the mother of his children, his companion, and eventually the First Lady of the Civil Rights Movement. In 1954, King was called as pastor for Dexter Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. He also received his PhD from Boston University and settled into the role of husband and congregational leader. But with Jim Crow laws and civil injustices holding steady in Montgomery and in much of the Old South, King was pulled into action. Being relatively new to the area, local pastors and civil rights activists saw him as someone who could possibly push their efforts forward. They were correct. With his strong, powerful, elegant voice, his magnetism, his ability to reach people, and his talent for the spoken word, King was exactly what the civil rights movement was missing. The movement pushed forward with protests and rallies, with King as its spokesman and leader. And on August 28, 1963, King led the March on Washington, where he delivered his most famous speech to a crowd of almost 250,000 at the nation's capital.
Sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream.
His persistence, power, popularity, and the growing force of the unenfranchised became a threat to those who would keep Black Americans and other oppressed minorities underfoot. To them, King was nothing more than in the way, an obstacle to be removed, so the ways of those who would oppress to maintain control could continue. King became a marked man. He would be threatened and intimidated, attacked, beaten, jailed, stabbed, and hospitalized. But despite all of this, King pushed onward with grace, courage, vigor, and determination despite his impending demise. Eventually, his works would garner him the Nobel Peace Prize in '64, making him the youngest recipient of the award at that time. On March 7, 1965, the SCLC and SNNC civil rights groups, led by John Lewis and other group leaders, gathered and marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, in protest of the murder of civil rights activist Jimmy Lee Jackson by an Alabama state trooper earlier that year. As the protesters reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met with bloody resistance, and hundreds of protesters were attacked and beaten by police dogs, fire hoses, and vigilante groups. This attack would eventually result in the deaths of 3 protesters and become known as Bloody Sunday. On March 21st, 1965, weeks after the infamous Bloody Sunday March, King led thousands on another 50-mile march from Selma to Montgomery. This time with the protection of the National Guard to the dismay of the local hate groups. These marches, the efforts of King, and the countless number of other civil rights groups and protesters forced the government's hand into finally making civil rights acts and the Voting Bill of 1965 a reality. On April 4th, 1968, King was fatally shot at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee. As with any assassin, his murderer thought nothing of him as a father, a husband, a son, or peacemaker, let alone a human. Whether the assassin acted alone or was in league with others, King's loss weighs heavily on millions worldwide to this day. From 1957 till his assassination, King traveled over 6 million miles and spoke over 2,500 times, appearing wherever there was injustice. He led many protests, wrote 5 books, several articles, and was, and still is, renowned worldwide as the symbolic leader of African Americans and the oppressed.